Raise your hand if you want to be a millionaire. I guess Anurup doesn't want to be one.
He's focusing on the economy.
Ask yourself, what would you do if you had $1 million in cash?
Spend wisely.
Define wisely for you.
Respect the value of the money and try to get more goods as possible, and also brings you some happiness.
All of those are great points and something I'm actually going to explain today. Today, I'm going to talk to all of you about how to be a millionaire. What you may not be aware of is that there are actually multiple ways to become a millionaire. The first is the most obvious and easiest example. That would be to play Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Does that sound like a great strategy for everyone? Who wants to just go on the show, answer 15 questions right, and be a millionaire?
Yeah. It's not sexy, but...
Really? I heard it got you all the women. That said, if this is your chosen route, can anyone guess the odds of winning Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
5 million to 1.
Nice try. Does anyone else want to venture a guess?
It's with more than that.
That's true.
Okay.
I'll say 1 in 35,000.
You're going down. The actual odds of winning Who Wants to Be a Millionaire are
Wow.
1 in 135 million. Ladies and gentlemen, ask yourself, is that a viable way for you to become a millionaire?
No.
Okay, let's try another methodology. Let's play Powerball. Powerball is great. You win, they take the taxes out, and you're sitting with millions of dollars. Does that sound like a great strategy for everyone? $1 of tickets at a time?
No.
Once in a while, yeah, but not a strategy.
Okay, fair enough. So if that's the case, what do you think your odds are of winning Powerball?
The other one was 130 million to 1. So it's got to be like 200 million to 1 or something.
420 something.
I'm getting good guesses. Here's the actual odds.
290.
Wow.
292 million to 1. What does that mean? You can't play Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You can't go and win the Powerball with any reasonable certainty of success. What's the real way to do it? The true and the real way to become a millionaire is through saving. Today, I am going to talk to all of you about how to budget, how to select a career that allows you to plan to become a millionaire, and most importantly, how to avoid the double traps of student and consumer debt that keep you from achieving your goal, to become a millionaire. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first discussion is going to be about budgeting, specifically zero-based budgeting. Raise your hand if a budget sounds like a horribly constricting idea to you. It isn't. Really, it's not. A budget is simply you saying, here's the money that I have, and I am choosing to spend it in this manner. You might say, I only expect to live 60 years on this earth. I don't expect to see retirement. I don't care. And so I am going to spend all of my money on things that make me happy. Now, so I have a love for travel. I might say I'm going to spend $10,000 a year of my income on travel. that might be my strategy. I may not desire to become a millionaire. I may rather desire to visit all 190 plus countries. That's something you have to decide for yourself. You might say, well, the average life expectancy in the United States is closing in on 80 years old. I expect that by the time I'm 65, I'm going to have a significant portion of life left, and I need to be prepared for it so that I'm not living on just my Social Security check and my whatever mortgage, pension that I might be getting. So if that's your plan, you want to have money for that. Or you might say, I don't care. I've got delayed gratification as my primary goal. If delayed gratification is your primary goal, you should expect that we're going to try and get this done by 50. Raise your hand if you want to be a millionaire by the time you're 50 years old.
I'm over 50. Not quite there yet.
Okay, raise your hand if you want to be a millionaire by the time you're 60 years old.
What about before 50?
The methods I'm going to show you today absolutely ensure that if you are disciplined and you're intelligent about your money, you can absolutely reach $1 million before you reach 50 years old. It's all up to you. You don't have to be a Mark Zuckerberg or another tech entrepreneur in order to become a multimillionaire. It's about being consistent. It's about being disciplined. It's about knowing what you have and investing it smartly so that you can enjoy your million when you get there. And that is what I'm going to speak to you about right now. So let's start. Raise your hand if you are a student or if you know students. How many of them actually budget during their college years? You haven't seen
Very
it.
few.
A few of them.
Very few.
Very few. That's a true statement. If they did, I guarantee you they'd all be millionaires by the time they were 40.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the zero-based budget. Zero-based budgeting, which was popularized by Dave Ramsey, is by far the most effective way to budget. Why? Because every year you reevaluate your budgetary goals, your financial goals, and your expenses based on what you have right here, right now. You don't assume that your income will constantly go up. You don't assume that it's going to drop in future years. You evaluate each and every income and expense on its own points at that time that you start your budget for the year. Raise your hand if you've heard of a zero-based budget before. No? So I'm going to give you the example of what a zero-based budget for a student should look like. Most students live on campus. Their rent, or in this case what we would call their residency costs, their meal plan, and everything else comes included with their residency. So we only have to put in one line for that. Who's expecting or went through terrible food at the college cafeteria? That's normal. My brother went to the University of Miami. He consistently complained about their food. I guess he should have stayed home instead and went to USF. Funnily enough, that's something that we'll discuss in just a little bit. So you should also assume that it's possible to go ahead and budget as a college student and also work so that you can actually either cover your expenses now so that your student debt is lower, so that you can actually enjoy your college career a little bit. So let's take a look at the strategy. You start with what the money you have. You continue through your financial statements. I'm sure most of you are aware that most companies have financial statements. I should know. I do them all the time. And just yesterday, I was sitting with one of my clients, a restaurateur, makes great burgers. Yet he couldn't figure out where his money was going. I asked him, why do you keep pulling $700 a month literally every week out of the bank account? He said, oh, I'm gambling. Some of you were in here, you talked about the Powerball. What were the odds of the Powerball again?
292 million.
2.
1.
Yeah.
Gambling's not a great strategy, especially if you're pulling out $700 a week to do that. After you've seen what your income and expenses are, you've got to make some decisions. What's important to you? What is not important? What do you just absolutely have to eliminate? And finally, you're going to allocate your income among those expenses and whatever you decide is best for you. So let's take a look at our student budget. Can anyone tell me the minimum wage right now?
It's like $9 an hour.
$8.25.
The federal minimum wage is actually set $8.25 right now,
Okay.
as you said. So what does that mean? If you are a college student working 20 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, you should expect to make about $7,000 a year. Some of you might say, well, why would I want to do that? Because it gives you the opportunity to actually go forth and actually budget ahead, because your expenses are lower. You may pay for your cost of residency right now. You may decide, all right, this isn't working for me, I'm going to go ahead and give it another shot. Student budget to look like. They're making about $7,000 a year. They get some additional money from their student loans. Note that student loans are based on which school you're going to. If you go to the University of South Florida, it's going to change a lot compared with if you're going to the University of Miami or the University of Florida or Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to keep all of that in mind. So here we see that the most important expenses for a college student are their rent, or in this case, their residency costs. They might have a cell phone bill that they have to pay at $50 a month. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you knew that you can actually use your regular expenses to help build your credit score. Yes,
Like a utilities payments
correct.
through the credit cards.
Yeah, not just through credit cards. There is a credit tracker that's made by Experian. It only costs about $20 a month. If you take that credit tracker and you include your monthly expenses, having that regular payment over an extended period of time will actually lift your credit score and build your credit even if you're not spending too much. Now, myself, I was lucky. I actually chose to go locally. I had most of my expenses paid for except for my tuition and whatnot. So what we saw was that my loans didn't exist. Instead, I had my tuition paid for through scholarships of Florida Prepaid, which you should definitely consider if your parents paid for it or if you've got kids yourself, because you want to lock in their tuition rates today, not 20 years from now. So go ahead and switch back to the PowerPoint. So let's go ahead. Does anyone have any questions for me from this first round?
You put in net cash flow, right?
Correct.
The expenses were more, the income was less. What is the net cash flow?
So the net cash flow in this case, for a student, it would be the total disbursements from your student loans that actually arrive to you, plus your wages, less all of your expenses. I'm aware that tuition typically goes to student loans go to pay tuition.
Mm-hmm.
For simplicity's sake, I've left that out of here. I can change that if you need it though.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to the next segment. So the next segment is selecting your major. not all majors carry the same value. I, as an accountant, have a median wage, which is less than the median wage for a petroleum engineer, or a financial planner, or a physician. You have to decide what it is the most successful major for you, and that depends solely on you. You may decide, I am not someone who's a numbers guy like I am. You might say, I don't want to be a CPA or a financial planner. I want to be a petroleum engineer. Excuse me, that's actually a bigger numbers field. Or you might say, I love the sight of blood. Let me go be a surgeon. It's all dependent on you. So select the major that fits your situation best. Don't worry about what other people might think. What you should be aware of is that perhaps the career you want is not a career that requires a college degree. In that case, you should think about, is trade school a fit? We need more plumbers and electricians today than any time in the past 50 years. And like it or not, Tom, my friend there, is a new home builder. Every one of those homes needs wiring, right?
Yeah.
Every one of those homes needs toilets, because let's face it, we're not going to come outside to go to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a situation where you want to make sure that you're going to have a job, you should look for a field, and you should look for the maximum investment. Raise your hand if you've heard of apprenticeship programs. Some of these apprenticeship programs will in fact pay you to become educated. If you're getting paid to be educated, there's no student loans. You can start saving right now, and down the road, you can become a millionaire and retire from your life of unclogging toilets that much quicker. So consider what it is that you want to do. And if you don't know what you want to do, but you still want to go to college, I would recommend going to community college. Raise your hand if you have at least a 3.5 GPA in high school, or you did when you were in high school. If you go to a community college in the state of Florida, your tuition is 100% covered through community college. Your first year, your second year. And in fact, if you go to highly rated enough community college, you may in fact be able to go to a better college than you went to out of high school. So let's talk a little bit about paying for college. There are 4 major ways of paying for college. The first, everyone knows about, student loans. The student loan crisis that's happening now is unprecedented. Does anyone know how many dollars of student loans there are outstanding right now?
It's pretty high.
3 trillion?
Couple billion.
Not quite. It's $1.3 trillion. Does anyone know the total GDP of the United States of America? It's $16 to $17 trillion. Typically, student loans are backed by the federal government, which is coincidentally why they cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, because if those loans were left outstanding, the US would be in deep trouble. There are a couple of different types of student loans. The first are subsidized loans. Does anyone know what a subsidized loan is? Go ahead, Peter.
Is the one that, you have the government want to pay for you, and that way you don't have to pay interest until you finish school?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
A subsidized loan, your interest is paid for by the government while you're in school, and then you only start making payments once you graduate. The other is an unsubsidized loan. Can anyone guess what the difference between a subsidized and unsubsidized loan is?
You pay interest right away on an unsubsidized loan from the day you
Correct.
take the money.
Correct. So you want to avoid loans as much as possible, because if you have student loans, they are unsecured debt. And I would tell you that unsecured debt is typically bad debt because you typically just can't let it go. So if you have student loans, you are now in the pit of debt. They're not as expensive as, say, credit cards, but they're dangerous in their own right. So let's talk about the ways to finance your college education that do not require you to actually go into debt. The first are scholarships. Scholarships, by their nature, are tax-free. Who wants a tax-free form of education spending? If you have an opportunity, get as many scholarships as you can. In fact, most private universities, in order to compete with public universities, offer some form of scholarships. The University of Miami might charge $50,000 for tuition, but they reverse part of it by giving you a $20,000 scholarship. It's currently estimated that the Harvard University, which everyone here I'm sure knows, could in fact fund scholarships for every single one of their students for the foreseeable future just on their endowment alone. And in fact, because their endowment is so large, the IRS and the federal government has started impacting Harvard and similar institutions to actually give out more scholarships so that people who are of working or middle class backgrounds actually can go to a place like Harvard or Dartmouth or Yale. The next are grants. Grants are specifically for low-income individuals. They are tax-free, particularly Pell Grants. However, they're not as generous in most cases as scholarships. Can anyone tell me what the maximum amount you can get on a Pell Grant is? It's $5,900 a year. Might help if you're going to USF. It'll cover your bills, but it won't help if you decide to go to, say, the University of Miami.
Right.
And lastly, this is a great source, although it deprives you of certain tax advantages, your family members. If you get your family to pay for your education, that's great for you, because most parents don't really expect their kids to pay them back. Raise your hand if your parents helped you pay for your college education. That was magnanimous of them, wasn't that? Wasn't it? I would encourage you to go ahead and set that up if you can. Sit down with your family and talk about your plan for paying for college. The spreadsheet I've given you actually helps you along that goal. So let's take a look at your choice of university. There are public universities, there are private universities. Can anyone give me an example of a really good public university?
UF.
UCLA.
Correct, all three of those are public universities. I went to USF, which coincidentally is ranked 124th in the nation, according to the US News and World Report. Where is UCLA ranked?
Not sure.
Not sure?
Yeah.
Jen?
But I know UC Berkeley's up there.
Pretty high.
UC Berkeley is most certainly public, but that actually leads to an interesting question. Who knows about in-state versus out-of-state tuition? In-state tuition is always going to be lower for you. The reason that in-state tuition is lower for you is because it's already being paid for through you and your parents' tax dollars. Here in Florida, that means sales tax. You go to the grocery store and you buy some M&Ms. You may pay sales tax. You buy a house, you pay property tax. You might be in a business and you might have a lot of assets in the business outside of the actual property. You might pay tangible property tax. So if your choice is between a public university and an out-of-state public university, which doesn't give you those benefits because you're not a taxpayer of that state, which would you rather pick? In-state or out-of-state?
It's a state.
Good. And what you should also consider is, does my chosen profession absolutely require that I go to an out-of-state university? If your goal is to be an award-winning journalist, and your options are UCLA, USF, or the University of Washington, which is probably going to get you where you want to go?
Probably somewhere in Washington, right? Journalism? I don't know.
I was actually
Discussing.
speaking of the state of Washington.
Oh, okay. I have no idea.
Is UW, like, do they have a strong journalism program, or is that?
That's the question that you have to answer for yourself. Typically, what you'll find is that if you have a targeted program that is likely to make you lots and lots of money because you're going to end up being Piers Morgan on MSNBC, then yes, absolutely, go to UCLA. Let's raise that up a notch. What if your decision is between UCLA, which has an absolutely great journalism school, or the Columbia University in New York, an Ivy League? Which would you pick then? Yes, I would. Why? Because their tuitions are equivalent. But let's see if you actually decide that you want to be an accountant like me, a CPA. Most CPAs, like myself, make about $73,000 a year. If you're making $73,000 a year, would you rather pay $50,000 a year in tuition and living expenses to UCLA, or would you rather pay $10,000 to $20,000 a year to USF? Exactly. Your return on investment is higher because you're spending less. It is all about what you're deciding to do. And remember, if you decide that you want to go on to grad school because your goal is to become a physician or another advanced degree, then you have to ask yourself, well, what's that going to cost me? And is it going to actually work out? Most physicians these days graduate with about $100,000 in student loan debt. In fact, one of my clients is very driven to pay off his debt because he wants to go on and invest in properties and businesses. So let's take a look at an example on the cost of college. I'm going to switch back to our spreadsheet. So here we have the cost of student loans for attending the University of South Florida. For simplicity's sake, in this example, I have chosen to believe that we are going to finance our entire college with student loans and whatever other wages we've got. So as you can see here, the full cost of attendance is about $18,000 a year. Now, you're looking at that student loan amount and you're wondering, why is it $25,000? The reason that it's $25,000 there is because you want to assume just for your tuition. You want to pay your living expenses on your own. You should minimize as much as you can. So 4.53% is the current student loan interest rate. If you're in college and you're choosing to spend your money on a $10 meal at Moe's or $5 at Starbucks, it adds up. There are 4 different terms that you can pay off your student loans on once you graduate from college. So if you take a look here, you're going to see how much your monthly payment is. Let's say you got $25,000 in loans when you graduate. That's actually under the national average, which is about $38,000. If you choose to pay it off in 10 years, your monthly payment is going to be just $265 a month. If you choose to pay it off over 25 years, it's going to be $142 a month. But there's a caveat with that. The longer your repayment term, the more interest you have to pay. So looking here, you see that we've got total interest paid. For 10 years, it's going to be $6,000. But if you decide to go down to 25 years, it's going to be $17,000. And that doesn't include all the principal you have to pay back. Principal there is going to be $25,000. So if you paid off $25,000 plus $17,000, that's $42,000. If you decide to pay it off in 10 years, you're only paying about $31,000. Raise your hand if you can spend $10,000 better than your student loan provider can.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to consider this. This applies to every other form of debt that you could possibly think of. What if you decide, okay, I've got credit card debt. Credit card debt is much worse than this. Let me show you what happens if we change these interest rates to credit card interest rates.
It's crazy.
Does that sound like a great proposition? Would you want to spend money on a credit card if you knew that's how much interest you'd be paying back? And that's just on $25,000 of principal. So I would encourage you to consider, what does it mean for you to spend money on credit? And take some questions. Does anyone have any questions for me right now?
The interest that is being paid off of student loan, is it tax deductible? Does the government give you any credit?
Great question. The answer is yes, there is a deduction for student loan interest. It's $2,500 a year. It's not a credit, it's $2,500 a year, but you should be aware that it actually gets capped. If you make more than $65,000 a year, as most college graduates who enter a worthwhile profession should expect to, you're actually not really gaining anything because you'll lose out on the value of the deduction. In fact, in our spreadsheet examples here, I have specifically chosen to leave a deduction out because I expect that you will all be highly successful people and that you will make way more than the actual student loan interest deduction. Peter.
Do you want to kind of go over a little bit in details about the prepaid college tuition?
That's a great question. Let me talk about that. How many of you have heard of Florida Prepaid? Florida Prepaid is a great program. Florida Prepaid has been around for 30 plus years. It's used to lock in tuition rates at the given time. My parents, I'm very fortunate, paid for Florida Prepaid back in the 90s when tuition rates were ridiculously low. What did that mean? That meant that I was paying 90s era tuition rates, which were $2,000 to $3,000 a year, for education that was worth, again, $6,000 to $7,000 a year. That's a 1/3 the price situation. That's 60–70% off. Ask yourself, is that a great solution for you? I think for most people it is. And we should expect that given the student loan crisis, that prepaid programs are going to take on increasing value. In fact, if you get a prepaid program now, 20 years from now, inflation might have pushed the tuition at just at USF up to $10,000 or $11,000. So you're saving $4,000 or $5,000 a year on tuition just by paying for it right now. Any other questions? Anirudh.
What would you say is the best way to locate scholarships?
Typically, there are a number of ways you can do this. The National Merit Scholars Program typically gives about $20,000 per person per year in scholarships if you actually pass and get a high score on the pre-SAT. That's one option. There are a number of websites that you can look for that will actually list scholarships available for you. If you're not sure where to look, a great place to look would actually be your college counselor, because they are responsible not just for helping you get into the best possible college, but also making sure that the college that you decide to go to has available scholarships. Some universities offer scholarships of their own. In fact, many private schools, especially here in Florida, do so to stay competitive. Can anyone tell me what the academic ranking of the University of Florida is?
8.
It's actually 54th. overall in the national rankings.
Ah,
Can anyone tell me what Miami's ranking is? It's roughly the same. So Miami, annual tuition is $50,000 a year. UF is about $7,000 or $8,000. Who would you rather choose, all things being equal?
Miami.
I'm sorry, it is not all about the U. No matter how much you and my brother might claim otherwise. I would encourage you to consider it. If you go to Miami and you have a 4.0 GPA and you want to be a doctor, will you become a doctor? Most likely you will, because your study habits are good and you're going to get into the med school of your choice. If you go to the University of South Florida and have a 4.0 GPA and you want to become a doctor, are you likely to become a doctor?
yes.
So ask yourself, again, do you want to pay $10,000 or $20,000 a year, or you want to pay $50,000 a year? Flip side, University of Miami does offer scholarships. They're typically between $15,000 to $20,000 a year. So that reduces it to $30,000. Again, 4.0 GPA, graduate of the University of Miami, wants to become a doctor. Will you become a doctor? Most likely. My dad, who is a physician, has a great joke. What do you call the lowest ranked member of a graduating class from medical school?
He's a doctor still, right?
Correct.
Still a doctor.
You call them doctor.
Yeah,
As long as you graduate, that's all that matters.
right.
So don't think about it from that perspective. You might want to pick another school. You might want to pick Stanford, but only pick one of those schools if you know that the plan you have for your career is going to actually be highly monetarily lucrative for you. When I say that, I mean you start a startup and you make $30 million. That's not most people. So let's go ahead and talk about what happens now that you've graduated. Most of us in this room have in fact graduated, but I know that there's one person who hasn't, and this benefit is for him. What is the first thing that you should do after you graduate and get your first paycheck? Anyone want to take a guess? Raise your hand if you, go ahead.
You should probably deposit the paycheck.
You're right, but what are you going to do once you deposit the paycheck? There's a few traditions. My family's tradition is that you give your first paycheck to your parents. Raise your hand if you think that's a great idea for the parents.
Yeah, no, I do.
What if you say, well, I'm selfish, I'm not going to give it to my parents. What if you want to say, I'm going to blow it all, as Shaq did on his first paycheck from the NBA? Does that sound like a great idea? Well, no, but for Shaq it worked out because someone pulled him aside and said you need to start saving, like we're talking about here. And because of that, Shaq is actually quite wealthy in his retirement now, because he saved his money. He didn't spend it on too many Air Jordans, not that he would probably wear them. So the most important thing you can do, start with your 401k. That is your basic savings vehicle. No matter what your salary is coming out of college, your first 10% of your income should go to your 401k. The numbers that I showed you earlier that involve your career investments do not include what's in your college savings account, or excuse me, your 401k. The second thing you should do, get out of the pit of debt. It doesn't matter whether you have $25,000 of student loans to USF, or $57,000 in student loans, or even $100,000 in student loans because you went to grad school and became a physician. Pay them off. That is priority number one after you start putting money into your 401k. Always, 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 10% to charity. If you don't give 10% to charity, you will find that you are less humble, and unfortunately, as they say, pride comes before a fall. always, always, always give 10%. Doesn't matter where it is. You might want to donate 10% of your income to a feeding mission in Nigeria. They're hungry out there, you should feed them. It doesn't matter if you want to donate that 10% for other students to graduate debt-free and with college scholarships. And finally, you want to talk about investments. Does anyone know what the average rate of return for the S&P 500 is over the last 90 years?
7 or 8?
Like 8 or something.
Peter has an idea.
It's actually over 10%.
That's correct. There was actually a number done, it's actually about 9.8%. I've had some financial advisors tell me that you have to be very aggressive to save at a rate of over 10% a year. Not true. You can absolutely save at 10% a year if all you're doing is investing in the S&P 500. Note, I know that people might think, well, how do I invest in that? Peter's a financial advisor, he can talk to you about that, but there's actually a Vanguard fund that essentially mirrors the S&P. It buys all the same stocks, and you can actually go and buy that fund. Or, if you're one of my friends who loves playing the stock market, you can actually generate returns higher than 10%. Or, if you're wealthy enough, you can go to Bain & Company, Mitt Romney's old firm, and they'll give you 17 or 18% returns average per year. All depends on where you get to. If you decide that, hey, I think investments are too risky for me, I don't want to play the stock market, there are other ways of actually making your money for your passive income. A great example is rental property. Raise your hand if you've stayed in an Airbnb or you own a rental property of some kind. Raise your hand if you stayed in a hotel. The hotel is not going to give you any investment returns, and typically they actually look for quite a lot of money. I actually met with a hotel group, and their minimum investment requirement was $250,000. Mind you, they were offering 16% returns a year, but again, you have to have a high barrier to entry for that. So that might be on later on in your career. But any good rental property should get you between 6 to 8% per year, and you can always reinvest that money because it's cash, or you can use it to live on. Because if by the time you're 50, you've got $1 million in investment property and you're getting 8%, how much is 8% of $1 million? $80,000 a year. Raise your hand if you think you can live on $80,000 a year. I guess these guys really love their spending. So all this leads to the question, when will you become a millionaire? I know my number, assuming that I make the average salary for an accountant. My number is 19 years. That means by the time I'm 50 years old, I will be a millionaire. If I decide I want to retire by then, great. But let's say I don't want to retire. Let's say I want to work the next 15 years until 65. How much more am I going to make? Anyone want to take a guess? How much more can I make in the 15 years following the 19 it took for me to become a millionaire?
You need to make less. You need to make less.
How would I make less?
I mean, because of the investment that you have, and because you save your money, technically your money keep on growing.
You're right. So let's say I keep putting in the same amount of money every single year.
You'd be rolling in it.
I would be rolling in it.
Yeah.
If I today decided to retire at age 65, 34 years from now, and all I ever did was invest in the S&P 500 at 9.8%, I would be worth about $1.9 million. So ask yourself, what is your number? I've got a great spreadsheet here that allows you to test all that stuff out. Being a millionaire is not a matter of luck. It is not a matter of how do I actually play the game? Being a millionaire is a matter of choice. You can decide today that you want to be a millionaire, and it is never too late to start saving. Is there anyone in this room who's over 60 years old? Okay, good. Is there anyone in this room who's over 50 years old? No one's going to answer this question except
I'm over
Tom.
50, man.
Raise your hand if you're over 40 years old. You have anywhere between 15 and 20 years before you retire. And if that's you, I have good news for you. If you retire at 65 and you start saving now, all of your money, because that's what's important to you, you can become a millionaire by the time you're 65. And if you combine that with your Social Security and your pension, you will be absolutely financially secure for your retirement. Thank you. Go ahead.
I just
Questions?
have one question. So how does inflation play a role in this, right? So if you look back to like 20, 30 years ago at the value of money compared to now, and if you, for example, like save that money, even though you get a return like based on an investment, for example,
Mhm.
how does that compare to inflation? How do you like think about that? How do you factor that into your calculations?
Great. So inflation has typically been anywhere from 1 to 3% a year. In some cases, you may have deflation depending on the industry. What you should be aware is that pretty much every stock, most rental properties, and any business that you undertake will typically give you returns which are well beyond inflation. So if you want to take inflation out, if you want a risk-free rate, the best thing you can do is look at US Treasury bonds. Those typically are the most effective way of having a risk-free rate of return. Even though we're $21 trillion in debt, they are still considered the gold standard. Every bank and investment opportunity around the world today is measured on the return rate of US Treasury bonds. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, we are done.
Thank you.
Very good, Zane.